What up, YouTube? It's knowledge of self-determination. So I'm going to be reading more from the Booker T. Washington's book Up from Slavery. Um, and just to give a little bit of exposition on why I decided to do this, and it's actually quite simple. Because for one, Black history, the history of my people, is not respected enough in this country whatsoever. For it to only be relegated to 1 month and the shortest month of the year on top of that, to me is a huge slap in the face of my people, my ancestors who have contributed their blood, sweat, and tears, their lives, and everything to this country. Even in the face of all the mistreatment, the subjugation, and disenfranchisement, the racial bias, the discrepancies, the disparity, slavery, and everything else, Jim Crow, and just everything else, my people still continue to work and fight for this country, just like anybody else who called this place their home. And there are things about Booker T. Washington's life that people don't know. Like his struggle, what he had to go through to actually become the founder of the Tuskegee Institute and how that came about and where he received his education from. These are facts that are not widely known, and I'm going to take it upon myself to share that information with those who do not know, and for those who may know and may want to brush up on their own information and knowledge. But learning something new never hurt anybody. Not taking the time to learn anything at all hurts everyone. So, I'm going to begin. Chapter 3, The Struggle for an Education. One day, while at work in the coal mine, I happened to overhear two miners talking about a great school for colored people somewhere in Virginia. This was the first time that I had ever heard anything about any kind of school or college that was more pretentious than the little colored school in our town. In the darkness of the mine, I noisily crept as close as I could to hear the two men who were talking. I heard one tell the other that not only was the school established for members of my race, but that the opportunities were provided by which poor but worthy students could work out all or part of the cost of board at the same time be taught some trade or industry. So after hearing this, Booker T. Washington had his mindset that he was going to go and work, or rather go and learn at the Hampton University, because gaining an education was something that he had valued highly. And a lot of our people during the time of Reconstruction had a large value for education. As we know, gaining an education is the key to opening doors for yourself. But I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more. Let's see. After hearing of the Hampton Institute, I continued to work for a few months longer in the coal mine. While at work there, I heard of a vacant position in the house of General Lewis Ruffner, the owner of the salt furnace and coal mine. Mrs. Viola Bruckner, the wife of General Ruffner, was a quote-unquote Yankee woman from Vermont. Mrs. Ruffner had a reputation all through the vicinity for being very strict with her servants, and especially with the boys who tried to serve her. Few of them had remained with her more than 2 or 3 weeks. They all left with the same excuses. She was too strict. And one of the main reasons why he wanted to work in the house with the white woman was because it was more money, and he wanted to save up so that he can make the voyage to Richmond, Virginia, so he can attend the Hampton Inn and possibly pay his board there. So he was hired to work in the house with to be the assistant or servant of this white woman, Mrs. Ruffner, for $5 a month, which is no money now, and it really wasn't any money then. But to a person who had never probably earned a dime in his life before he started working in a coal mine, he thought he was working with something. Let's see. I had heard so much about Mrs. Ruffner's severity that I was almost afraid to see her, and trembled when I went into her presence. I had not lived with her many weeks, however, before I began to understand her. I soon began to learn that, first of all, she wanted everything kept clean about her, that she wanted things done promptly and systematically, and that at the bottom of everything, she wanted absolute honesty, and frankness. Nothing must be sloven or slipshod. Every door, every fence must be kept in repair. I cannot recall how long I lived with Mrs. Ruffner before going to Hampton, but I think it must have been a year and a half. At any rate, I here repeat what I have said more than once before, that the lessons that I learned in the house of Mrs. Ruffner were as valuable to me as any education I have ever gotten anywhere since. Even to this day, I never see bits of paper scattered around a house or in the street that I do not want to pick them up at once. I never see a filthy yard that I do not want to clean it, and paling off of a fence that I do not want to put it on. An unpainted or unwhitewashed house that I do not want to paint or whitewash it, or a button off one's clothes, or a grease spot on them, or on a floor that I do not want to call attention to it. Now, this attitude, these things that he learned from Mrs. Ruffner will actually pay him large dividends when he actually got to Hampton University, because he didn't have money to be boarded there, and he didn't have money to pay for the tuition. But the things that he learned from Mrs. Ruffner would actually help him gain access to Hampton University. So this man found a silver lining in anything that would. He found a silver lining wherever he could in order to make his dream come true. And he put up with and endured a lot of garbage from a lot of people just so that he could become the man that we know him as today. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead now. From fearing Mrs. Ruffner, I soon learned to look upon her as one of my best friends. When she found that she could trust me, she did so implicitly. During the 1 or 2 winters that I had with her, she gave me an opportunity to go to school for an hour in that day during a portion of the winter months. But most of my studying was done at night, sometimes alone, sometimes under someone whom I could hire to teach me. Mrs. Ruffner always encouraged and sympathized with me in all my efforts to get an education. It was while living with her that I began to get together my first library. So I'll skip ahead a little bit more now. Not going to read that whole part. Notwithstanding my success at Mrs. Ruffner's, I did not give up the idea of going to Hampton Institute. In the fall of 1872, I determined to make an effort to get there, although, as I have stated, I had no idea of the direction in which Hampton was or what it would cost to go there. I do not think that anyone thoroughly sympathized with me in my ambition to go to Hampton unless it was my mother, and she was troubled with a grave fear that I was starting out on a quote-unquote wild goose chase. So 1872, that is 9 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, I believe, and the 13th Amendment was signed, was basically put into the Constitution in 1865. So that's 7 years after that. So this was during the Reconstruction period, and Jim Crow era was pretty much soon to actually began. Let me see. I'm trying to. I can't remember right offhand when the Jim Crow era actually began, but it was around that 1870, 1880 mark where the Jim Crow era began, and when the Ku Klux Klan made their grand appearance onto the scene. Now I'll go ahead and read. Let me see. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit more. Now, finally, the great day came, and I started out for Hampton. I had only a small, cheap satchel that contained what few articles of clothing I could get. My mother at the time was rather weak and broken in health. I hardly expected to see her again, and thus our parting was all the more sad. So I'm gonna skip ahead now. The distance from Malden to Hampton is about 500 miles. I had not been away from home many hours before it began to grow painfully evident that I did not have enough money to pay my fare to Hampton. One experience I shall long remember. I had been traveling over the mountains most of the afternoon in an old-fashioned stagecoach when late in the evening the coach stopped for the night at a common unpainted house called a hotel. All the other passengers except myself were whites. In my ignorance, I suppose that the little hotel existed for the purpose of accommodating the passengers who traveled on the stagecoach. The difference that the color of one's skin made, the difference that the color of one's skin would make, I had not thought anything about. After all, the other passengers had been shown rooms and were getting ready for supper. I shyly presented myself before the man at the desk. In long story short, he didn't have any money to pay for room or board or even food. It wouldn't have mattered if he had a pocket full of money. They weren't going to serve him or let him stay in the house. So basically, in the winter of in Virginia in the wintertime, which I will tell you is very cold, he had to sit outside, basically stand outside all night and walk around just to keep himself warm. So let's see. Okay, so now I'm gonna skip ahead. I must have walked the streets till after midnight. This is after he had already arrived at Virginia, and he had no money. So this is where the story picks up. At last, I became so exhausted that I could walk no longer. I was tired. I was hungry. I was everything but discouraged. Just about the time when I reached extreme physical exhaustion, I came upon a portion of a street where the board sidewalk was considerably elevated. I waited for a few minutes till I was sure that no passers-by could see me, and then crept under the sidewalk and lay for the night upon the ground with my satchel of clothing for a pillow. Nearly all night I could hear the tramp of feet over my head. The next morning I found myself refreshed, but I was extremely hungry because it had been a long time since I had had sufficient food. As soon as it became light enough for me to see my surroundings, I noticed that I was near a large ship, and that the ship seemed to be unloading a cargo of pig iron. So this is part of the struggle that Booker T. Washington had to endure just to make his dream come true of being admitted into the Hampton University. Now, on the ship that he saw, he approached the captain of the ship and basically, asked him if he could work for him. And the captain, pretty much, gave him a job and paid him whatever the going rate was at that day. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough money for him to be able to afford to feed himself, so that he wouldn't starve to death. And he continued to sleep under that raised sidewalk until he could save enough money to continue to move further with his main objective, and that was to get to the Hampton University. Let's see. So I'll read it just a little bit more, and then I'll stop. As soon as possible after reaching the grounds of the Hampton Institute, I presented myself before the head teacher for assignment to a class. Having been so long without proper food, a bath, and change of clothing, I did not, of course, make a very favorable impression upon her, and I could see at once that there were doubts in her mind about the wisdom of admitting me as a student. I felt that I could hardly blame her if she got the idea that I was a worthless loafer or tramp. For some time, she did not refuse to admit me. Neither did she decide in my favor, and I continued to linger about her and to impress her in all the ways I could with my worthiness. In the meantime, I saw her admitting other students, and that added greatly to my discomfort, for I felt deep down in my heart that I could not do as well as they, if I could only get a chance to show what was in me. After some hours had passed, the head teacher said to me, quote, "The adjoining recitation room needs sweeping. Take the broom and sweep it," end quote. It occurred to me at once that here was my chance. Never did I receive an order with more delight. I knew that I could sweep, for Mrs. Ruffner had thoroughly taught me how to do that when I lived with her. I swept the recitation room 3 times. Then I got a dusting cloth and I dusted it 4 times. All the wood around the walls, every bench, table, and desk, I went over 4 times with my dusting cloth. Besides, every piece of furniture had been moved and every closet and corner in the room had been thoroughly cleaned. I had the feeling that in a large measure of my future, I had the feeling that in a large measure my future depended upon the impression I made upon the teacher in the cleaning of that room. When I was through, I reported to the head teacher. She was a quote-unquote Yankee woman who knew just where to look for dirt. She went into the room and inspected the floor and closets. Then she took her handkerchief and rubbed it on the woodwork about the walls and over the tables and benches. When she was unable to find one bit of dirt on the floor or a particle of dust on any of the furniture, she quietly remarked, "I guess you will do to enter this institution." So, like I stated before, what he learned from the lady Mrs. Ruffner was a very, very vital key part in him becoming the Booker T. Washington that we know today. She taught him social etiquette for the most part, how to present himself, how to clean up and tidy, because as a slave, they were treated like animals, so they weren't taught the social norms that quote unquote civilized people utilize when dealing with other people in the society, in this European society. But I'm going to read more from Booker T. Washington's book to give an account on this man's life, skipping through various stages, as to not make the video so long, but giving you guys enough information that you can learn something about this brother who did everything he could to help his people to be able to learn, educate themselves, learn agriculture, and learn how to survive without the need to have someone take care of them. To be able to build up communities of black people that were self-sufficient and did not rely on other people to give them handouts. Which is kind of what black people don't want today. We don't want handouts. We just don't want opportunities to be blocked so that we can do what we can do for ourselves. And it's kind of the same thing that Booker T. Washington strove for. He didn't want a handout. He just wanted the opportunity to be able to shine. And that was it. How much different is he than us in today's society? But in any event, I'm going to leave you guys with that. I'll be back with more black history because, like I said, like the title of these videos are, Black History Every Day. So as long as I'm black and our history is continued to be circumnavigated and ignored, I'll continue to share what I know with my people and anyone who cares to learn. This is not just self-determination. Like, learn, and subscribe. I'm out. Peace.